the space of an ambassador, the footprint of a Maruti Zen, the economy of a diesel, and pricing close to the Maruti 800 was Ratan Tata's brief that led to the creation of the Indica, India's first indigenous passenger car and a car that propelled India into a list of only 10 countries till then. It was the great man's greatest achievement, which also includes the acquisition of Jaguar Land Rover, the creation of the Tata Nano. How can one forget the legendary statement, "A promise is a promise"? Which was the first luxury car to be shot with Indian tires. What make and model of tires? Drop the correct answer in the comments below and you could be one of the lucky fellows to win a set of tires for your car. More details of the contest in the description below. And if you don't know the answer, keep watching the video, we'll dive into that. And speaking of joint ventures, Ratan Tata's personal connections led to the Tata FIAT JV in India, which was short-lived but which continues today as an industrial JV making diesel engines for the new generation of the Safari, which 25 years ago laid the template for luxury 4x4s, ladder frame chassis, rear-wheel drive with the option of 4-wheel drive and a big diesel engine, which adopted a lot of the learnings from the Tata estate, which was evolved out of the Tata Sierra, India's first SUV, Tata's first passenger vehicle and the first car with direct inputs from Ratan Tata. Welcome to Gone But Not Forgotten on the Evo India channel, where we are looking back at Ratan Tata's cars. Not the cars that he owned, but the cars that he was involved in creating. Without him, we would not have had the Nano. Without him, no JLR under Tata stewardship. Without him, no Indica. Without the Indica, no Nexon. Without the Nexon, no Nexon EV. Without the Nexon EV, we would not have the EV ecosystem in the country today. In fact, it would not be a stretch to say that without him, India would not be a global automotive powerhouse. In fact, Ratan Tata was instrumental in so many cars that we've grown up with, and we car enthusiasts owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. This video is our way of saying a simple thank you. Why don't we start at the beginning? 1962, that's when Ratan Tata spent 6 months at Telco. But he won't go all the way back there. Let's go forward to 1988 when JRD Tata handed over the reins of Tata Sons. Now, this might interest you. It wasn't Ratan Tata who was ordained to take over as the chairman of Tata Sons, but it was Rusi Modi. However, Modi, who was then the satrap in charge of Tisco, as Tata Steel was then known, and it was the most profitable company in the Tata universe back then, he made some statements in the press that rattled the big brass at the other group companies. Notably, Sumant Mulgaonkar, who was in charge at Telco. He refused to step down. He insisted that Ratan Tata be immediately appointed as the executive deputy chairman at Telco. That happened on the 7th of April 1988. By December of 1988, when Ratan Tata formally took over the chairmanship of Telco from the ailing 82-year-old Mulgaonkar, labor unrest was serious. There were strikes, there were political tamasha. In fact, it got so bad that Ratan Tata threatened to pull out manufacturing out of Maharashtra. And that rattled the state government. They sent their ministers to intervene, and that's how the strike ended. It is said that Ratan Tata's tough stance that led to several changes, and that was the first and last strike at Telco/Tata Motors. In fact, that tough stance was to be repeated decades later at Shingur in West Bengal, where he made that famous statement, "If you put a gun to my head, you better pull the trigger because I'm not going to back down." 1988 was also when Tata launched the country's first indigenous pickup, the Tata Mobile 206. That was under the watch of Sumant Mulgaonkar, but come 1991, when India opened its doors to foreign investment, Ratan Tata's influence on Tata's first passenger car, the Tata Sierra, was unmistakable. He had studied architecture in the US, and the Sierra was inspired by the Ford Bronco of that time. Particularly, the rear glasshouse has an uncanny resemblance. The Sierra was based on the same X2 ladder frame architecture which was shared with the 206 and was rooted in Telco's truck-making journey up until then. But this was India's first luxury SUV. It got rear-wheel drive with the option of 4x4 for export markets. It got power steering, it got power windows, but only 2 power windows. The rear glass was fixed, and because of that it had to get factory fitted air conditioning, which was a novelty back then, but it had to get that because without that the people at the back, they would get properly cooked. It also got factory fitted radial tires, which again back then early 90s was a novelty in the time when cross plies used to rule the roost. Speaking about tires, a huge shout out to JK Tyre for kitting out this Sierra with their Ranger all-terrain tires, thereby dramatically improving the ride, handling and safety. Now these old cars, they don't have essential safety equipment that we've come to take for granted in modern cars. Stuff like tire pressure monitoring systems. But JK Tyre has a solution. Their smart tire range that connects via Bluetooth to an app on your phone, which gives you live readouts of not just the tire pressures, but tire temperatures. So you're never over or under inflated. Or you could opt for JK Tyre's puncture guard range of tires that protect you from nails up to 6 millimeters long. Back then, many Sierra owners also upgraded the tires, put bigger tires because this was all about making a statement. It looked really cool back then. It looks really cool even today. Very iconic. So much so that Tata Motors' showstopper, not just at this year's Bharat Mobility Show, but even last year's, was the Tata Sierra. Last year in the EV, this year in the production-ready ICE form, and soon in a couple of months, it is going to hit the roads and you're going to start seeing a lot of Sierras back again on the road without the impracticalities of the three-door layout. That the Tata estate looks very much like a Mercedes-Benz is no coincidence. Telco began their journey with Mercedes-Benz making trucks in 1954. Everything they knew about automobile engineering, they learned from Mercedes-Benz. Even the Sumo that was to follow a couple of years later, that had a lot of Mercedes cues, G-Wagon cues. In fact, that Sumo is another icon in the Telco back catalogue, and that deserves a full Gone But Not Forgotten, which is coming soon on the Evo India channel. Now, the Tata Mercedes truck making partnership started off so well that in the 60s, Mercedes wanted to make their cars in India. Now, to get that process moving, they sent a bunch of 180Ds to India, and Telco handed over those keys to the mantris and babus, the powers that be, in the hope that they would enjoy the Mercs and give them a license to manufacture the Mercs in India. However, socialism being what it was back then, after a year, the keys to those Mercs were handed back, and that was it. There was no word and there was no license to manufacture those cars. I mean, just look at the Mercedes. And imagine the mantris and babus, they prefer to be chauffeured in the back of an ambassador and not those Mercs. Socialism, I know that concept is just staggering. But 3 decades later, when liberalization kicked in, that partnership was revived, and on 22nd of April 1994, Mercedes-Benz India came into being as a joint venture, with Telco holding a 49% stake. A separate line was carved out at Telco's sprawling J block at Pimpri, and 2 Mercs rolled out, the E220 petrol and the E250 diesel, that distinguished by the vents in the front right fender. Now, these were also the most expensive vehicles that Telco had ever made. At 22 lakh rupees, these W124 E-Classes were more expensive than any of the trucks that Telco were producing. Now, Ratan Tata was no way involved in the styling, the engineering of the W124 E-Class. But the fact that the 124 came to India was his decision. Engineers who were associated with the launch at that time, they said that the initial demand projection was made based on the C-Class, which would have been around 3 lakh rupees cheaper. The 124 E-Class was something of an afterthought. They didn't think that the pricing would work. In a way, they had underestimated Mercedes' brand equity in the country. In permitting local assembly of the E-Class in India, the government had mandated a minimum of 15% local content. That meant the batteries, bulbs, certain fasteners, and most importantly, the tires were locally sourced. Now, according to Adil Jal Darukhanawala, in his road test in Car and Bike International, he says that a lot of manufacturers were interested in that prestigious contract. But JK Tyre backed it, and they developed a new V-rated tire capable of withstanding the 210 km/h top speed of the E-Class. That tire, the JK Tyre PEP7 tire, 195/65 R15 tire, was the first Indian tire to be OE on a luxury car in India. And that spirit of cutting-edge R&D and technology continues today.
with the Raghupati Singhania Center of Excellence in Mysore in collaboration with IIT Madras.
Developing a whole range of tires from 12 inches for the Maruti 800 and Alto all the way up to high-performance tires for dream cars, ensuring safe, hassle-free and high-performance motoring for all. Launching the W124 E-Class was Ratan Tata's call. At the press conference where this was introduced to the media, he said, "The decision to select the E220 was all mine and it had nothing to do with Mercedes-Benz. This has been a proven car, and even though the new E-Class has been announced, it would have been difficult to productionize this car in India at the same time. We have Ratan Tata to thank for the W124 in India." The Mercedes project was but a sidebar. What Ratan Tata really wanted to do was an Indian car, which he proposed in 1993, saying that the auto component and car manufacturers in India should get together to make a car worthy of national pride. To quote Ratan Tata, "Needless to say, there was considerable criticism and cynicism. In the absence of a positive reaction, I decided that if we were not going to do this as a collaborative national effort, Tata Motors would undertake the lead effort. In 1995, we formally undertook a program to develop a new Indian car. Two types of reactions were forthcoming at that stage. One was that we were being very brave, but the other, which came more often, was that we were being very foolish." That dream came alive in December of 1998 when the Indica was launched, catapulting India into an elite group of just 10 countries that had made their own indigenous passenger car up until then. Here I need to give you a bit of perspective. As we were going into the new millennium, the Indian car market was dominated by the foreign players. We had Suzuki obviously, then Hyundai, Daewoo, General Motors, Mitsubishi, Honda. These were the big players, and the few local manufacturers were there, like Mahindra for instance. They lacked any true innovation. Ratan Tata's dream was to establish India as a major player in the global automotive industry. And to compete with the international brands, the focus was on cost effectiveness, innovation, and a deep understanding of the market needs right here in India. And thus, the brief. The space of an ambassador, the footprint of a Maruti Zen, the running cost of a Maruti 800. That was the brief that delivered the Tata Indica. Just look at the impossibility of the ask. Such a big car squeezing all that space into the size of a Zen, giving the cost economics of a 800. But the Indica did hit those targets. So much so that hours before its launch, Maruti dropped prices of the 800 by 25,000 rupees, prompting Ratan Tata at the launch of the Indica to say that thanks to Tata Motors, now no matter what car you buy, you will get more car. More car per car. As you can see, that was one of the few very cool marketing taglines that led to a record 1,15,000 bookings at launch. But then, soon after that, quality problems reared its ugly head. And in the year 2000-2001, Tata Motors posted their first ever loss of 500 crores, which a few experts attributed to the back-breaking investment of 1,700 crores that had gone into the Indica project. It was even rumored that Tata Motors were planning to sell off their passenger car division. It was around that time that Ratan Tata met Bill Ford, chairman of the Ford Motor Company, and that's where that story sprung about how Ford humiliated Tata by saying that if Tata did not know how to make cars, why did they even get into car making, and that Ford would be doing Tata Motors a big favor by taking the passenger car division away from them, which I'm told is all rubbish. People in the know say that none of that really happened. What actually happened was that Tata Motors buckled down on the Indica. Retrofit camps were organized. 45,000 Indicas were recalled, parts were changed, and parallelly, a heavily modified Indica was in the works with all the problems sorted out. That car was this, the Indica V2. The V2, launched in 2001, became a roaring success. It soon became the fastest selling automobile in Indian history by selling over 1 lakh cars in 18 months. The Indica was not merely India's first indigenous car, but it also set up the global automotive supply chain here in India. And Ratan Tata, he was personally involved in all aspects of the Indica. The styling, for instance, it was his call to get the styling done by Idea in Italy. Before this, the Safari, that was styled in India. And he was said, I believe totally in our capabilities, but when we visit motor shows abroad, we see the great strides which global car companies have made, the excellent designs that they have already launched in Europe and other Western countries. Our effort should be to leapfrog into the future, and for that to happen, we should work in the design environment of Europe, where the design ethos is well ahead of India. Then we can hope for a car which is ahead of its time. The Indica was clearly ahead of everything else that was there in the country at that time. But there was a small problem, and that was that Idea also did Fiat's Project 178 World Cars. The Palio was soon going to be launched in India, right after the Indica. And the similarities between the two were obvious to anybody who put the two cars side by side. Idea had their biggest customer as Fiat, obviously no longer. And that's when Justin Norek and a bunch of designers at Idea who had worked on the Indica, they started their own design consultancy, Trilix. And that's also when Ratan Tata stepped in and gave Justin Norek and his band at Trilix a whole lot of design work from Tata Motors. So they did the Aria Roadster, the Aria Coupe, the Indiva, even the Nano that was to come, that was done by Trilix. Trilix eventually became Tata Motors' Italian design studio. Justin Norek, he passed away just a few weeks before Ratan Tata. As for Tata and Fiat, after that initial period of turbulence, there emerged a warm friendship at the very top. Ratan Tata with the chairman of Fiat and president of Ferrari at that time, Luca di Montezemolo, and the chief executive, Sergio Marchionne. That led to a distributorship arrangement in India, where Tata Motors distributed Fiat cars through their own dealerships. Ratan Tata, he was invited to become non-executive director on the board of Fiat Group. Ratan Tata, he also got himself a Ferrari California, but in left-hand drive. Now, why left-hand drive for driving in Mumbai? Nobody knows. But then Ratan Tata was a Parsi. And what is a Parsi without their own unique quirks? As for Tata and Fiat, the partnership was doomed right from the start. Down the line, the teams could never get along, and the project, after 5 loss-making years, was scrapped. However, the industrial JV, the 50-50 joint venture, continues even today. They are making the diesel engine for the Hector, the Compass, the Meridian, the Harrier, and also the Safari. And that's as good a time as any to go back to 1998, where earlier that year, before the Indica was launched, Tata Motors, they launched the Safari. The Safari was India's first SUV, or to be precise, India's first 5-door luxury SUV. And it set the template for everything that was to come later on. Ladder frame chassis, rear wheel drive with the option of 4x4, a big diesel engine. And it was said to have been inspired by the Mitsubishi Pajero, a few units of which were in India, imported by very successful Bollywood actors or industrialists. See the step in the roofline? It is said that Ratan Tata, he insisted that 6-footers like himself should be comfortable in the second row as well as in the jump seats right at the back. And that's why you have this step, and also this kink has been replicated, at least as a design feature, on the current Safari. This is the second generation Safari, the first with the 2-liter turbo diesel engine that didn't survive the vagaries of time. If you find any, most often it will be in the workshop. Safaris and workshops, it would be a recurring theme, especially to those who owned one of these. The first die-cut engine was borrowed from the 407 LCV, the 3-liter diesel engine. Now, power did go up to 114 bhp, but the most impressive aspect, or not so impressive aspect, was the 1500 RPM power band. That was it, just 1500 RPM. But the 407 is an important chapter in Tata Motors' history, because that's when they first took on the wave of Indo-Japanese competition. In the 80s, the commercial vehicle, the LCV segment, was opened up to joint ventures, and that's when real competition came in. DCM Toyota, Eicher Mitsubishi, Allwin Nissan, even Swaraj Mazda. But Tata, they made the 407 to tackle all of them, and the 407 crushed its rivals and established Tata Motors' preeminence as India's #1 commercial vehicle manufacturer. 2 decades later, Tata Motors realized that massive demand would be created for a smaller truck to act as a feeder between small towns and villages, and that's how the Ace mini truck came about. That was a smash hit. It was introduced in 2005, and 5 years later, the head of the Ace project was tapped to lead the Nano project. About a year after the Indica was launched, Ratan Tata was stuck in traffic in Bangalore and he noticed an entire family on one scooter. That year was 2000, and that was the year the idea of the Nano was born. Fast forward to the 2003 Geneva Motor Show. Ratan Tata is being interviewed by the Financial Times newspaper and they're questioning him about the low-cost, affordable car that is on Tata Motors' agenda. Now, when probed and pushed on the target cost, Ratan Tata says around $2,500 US. Next morning, the Financial Times has the headline, Tata working on a 1 lakh rupee car, which was the exchange rate then, not today. Now, Ratan Tata's first instinct was to issue a rebuttal, but then he thought, why not take that as the target? And that's when the chairman of Tata Motors and Tata Sons had his vision, and the team had their cost cast in concrete, the 1 lakh rupee car. Project X3, as the Nano was first called, was a clean sheet design. The only benchmark was that it had to be better than the Maruti 800. At the end of 2004, after exploring all options of buying an engine from outside, Tata Motors decided to do the engine in-house. At the end of 2005, Girish Wagh was transferred from the Ace to head the Nano project. The exterior design was done by Justin Norek in Italy. Remember Trilix? They did the design of the Nano. It was signed off in early 2005. But then the chairman thought that the nose looked a bit blunt. And that's where the nose was elongated by a few millimeters. But that was finally incorporated into the design. The chairman got what he wanted. At the end of 2005, the first engineering mules were prepared. After driving it, Ratan Tata said, I should not have driven this. The power was inadequate, and that's when the capacity first went up from 543 to 586 cc. The first mules had a CVT transmission, but Ratan Tata thought that that was inadequate, and that's when it was decided to do a 4-speed manual gearbox. That was done in-house, and it was done in record time, I think some 4 or 5 months. But the engine lacked power, and that's why in 2007, the final capacity was frozen on 624cc twin cylinder mounted at the rear. Why mounted at the rear? Because that liberated 21% more interior volume compared to a Maruti 800. The rear engine positioning wasn't its only quirk. The tires are staggered. The front tires are narrower than the rear tires. The wheels, they're 12-inch wheels, and they're mounted with 3 bolts, not even 4, just 3 bolts. You get a single wiper. The dashboard, this dashboard could have been used for export markets, right-hand drive as well as left-hand drive, because the speedo is mounted in the center. Air conditioning, it was only in 2007 that they decided that the top-end version should have air conditioning. Otherwise, it was not planned to have air conditioning. Later on, it got power steering, it got an AMT automatic gearbox, it got an opening rear tailgate. All that came later. Initially, it was basic, but you got air conditioning. Because everything was being done to a cost, everything was also being questioned, including why have 4 doors, especially why have a right rear door, because research said that this door is used only 5% of the time. But Ratan Tata said, no, that would look like too much of a compromise. Maybe right at the start itself, he should have insisted on an opening rear tailgate. That came much later on the twist. After all, nobody's perfect. Hitting cost targets needed suppliers to be on board with the vision of the Nano. And unlike in the past with the Indica, with the Nano's case, there was no skepticism because Ratan Tata was personally pushing the project and everybody was on board. Ratan Tata's personal friendship with the chief of Bosch's automotive business, Bernd Bohr, resulted in Bosch developing a stripped-down ECU with 13 parts and costing half of the ECU in the Indica. Ratan Tata wanted to explore the use of plastics instead of sheet metal. They worked extensively with General Electric. Over 100 prototypes were built, but the cost of engineered plastic could not come down below 140 rupees a kilo, whereas sheet metal was 100 to 105 rupees. And that's why they stuck with metal. No question, the Nano is as spacious as it is because of Ratan Tata, his height, his insistence on the cabin being spacious. All Tata cars have always been spacious. In fact, he also went into the little details. For instance, at the start, the headrests were built into the seats, but he thought that that gave the cabin too much of a closed-in feel. And that's when these holes in the headrest came about. The Nano lettering in the Bauhaus font with all the letters in the lowercase, that was his pick. He decided not to drive up in the red standard version, which is what was planned, but to launch it with the pearly white top-end Nano. The Space Odyssey theme song that played out, that was his pick. And he said, a promise is a promise, while announcing the starting price of 1 lakh rupees. The world erupted in raptures. Rivals got indigestion. Time magazine called it one of the dozen most influential cars of all time. And then politics took over. Ratan Tata was keen on Tata Motors taking a lead in the industrialization of West Bengal. He pushed for picking Shingur as the manufacturing site. But then we all know what happened. Speaking in December of 2006, he claimed that it was more than just politics behind all the tamasha that was going on. He said that if you put a gun to my head, you better pull the trigger or remove the gun because I'm not going to move my head. But 18 months later, after spending over 15 billion rupees in October of 2008, Ratan Tata said this is a lonely decision and they pulled out of Shingur. The entire plant had to be dismantled. 3,000 trailers trucked everything from one end of the country to the other, 2,100 kilometers away. It delayed everything. The cost obviously went up. Interim manufacturing started at Pune and Pantnagar. Obviously, quality was not up to the mark. There were issues with the fires, but that really blew up unnecessarily. That caused a further negative sentiment. But the biggest problem that the Nano had was that cars are aspirational and nobody wants to buy the world's cheapest car. That is what did it in for the Nano. Obviously, updates came later on. This is the twist. It got even the option of an AMT automatic transmission, a tailgate that opened. But there was going to be no repeat of the success that the V2 did after the initial troubles with the Indica. And after 10 years, the Nano was quietly put to bed. India's most radical, most forward-thinking, most visionary car was given a quiet burial in 2019. On 27 March 2008, Tata Motors became a global car company of consequence when they purchased Jaguar and Land Rover from Ford Motor Company for $2.3 billion. And no, it wasn't any revenge for the slight Ford inflicted on them 10 years ago. Nothing like that. Ratan Tata said, "We were invited to bid and were pleased to be considered. We were not on the prowl to acquire another car company. This is a great opportunity. A few years ago, one would not have thought that these brands would be available." In India, there was an outpouring of nationalistic pride. The Raj in reverse, that's what we all said, coming on the backs of the Chorus Steel acquisition and before that, Tetley Tea. But in India, the markets weren't convinced. Tata Motors shares, they tanked 77% from their previous high. A rights issue to fund the purchase, that was a damn squib. And eventually, Tata Motors had to go to 21 different lenders to arrange $3 billion in bridge financing. Then came 15 September 2008. Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy and money markets around the world imploded. By the end of 2008, Jaguar sales were down 30%, Land Rover sales were down 35%, 450 jobs had to be axed, the manufacturing plants moved to a 4-day week. Tata Motors had already injected 900 million into JLR over the past 6 months and they needed a further 800 million to keep JLR going, but there was no money to be had. Ratan Tata personally spoke to the powers that be at the UK government. And in 3 years, Tata Motors had achieved an impressive turnaround. In 2010-11, JLR recorded a pre-tax profit of 1.15 billion. In 2011-2012, Bloomberg estimated Jaguar Land Rover to be worth 14 billion. Not bad for a company that was acquired 4 years earlier for 2.3 billion and investors dumped its stock. One of the first decisions that Tata Motors made at JLR was to approve the Land Rover LRX concept for production. That went on sale in April of 2011 as the Range Rover Evoque, and it was the first SUV from the brand that broke away from the molds. It broadened the outlook for the Land Rover brand. It was not just a car or an SUV. The Evoque was a fashion statement. In public, Victoria Beckham was involved in the design process. But in private and in a more meaningful manner, Ratan Tata was involved in design. Land Rover design director Jerry McGovern, he acknowledged his contribution saying he, Ratan Tata, is very design literate and has been involved from the start. He nurtured and helped but never interfered. In its first year of production, over 100,000 Evokes were sold, which was a record for any Land Rover up till then. The Evoque was well on its way to repaying the 500 million investment in the project, and JLR had its first hit under Tata Motors ownership. Prior to 2008, neither Jaguar nor Land Rover were even officially sold in India. That changed in May of 2009, where Tata Motors were appointed the official importers for Jaguar and Land Rover. Tata Motors set up the premier car division within their passenger car business unit, and the first dealership was inaugurated in Worli at CJ House by Ratan Tata himself. Local assembly kicked off with the Freelander in May of 2011. And you know where? In the same plant in Chikli village adjoining the Tata Motors giant Pimpri factory, which was set up by Mercedes-Benz in 1999 and vacated in 2009 when Mercedes shifted to their own factory in Chakan. Recognize that fountain? The Mercedes lines and facilities must have been very useful in starting JLR production in India. In early 2013, Jaguar XF was added to the portfolio, followed by the Discovery Sport and Evoque. And this year, finally, Range Rover production has started right here in India. The first time Range Rover assembly is happening anywhere outside of the UK. What Tata Motors did was commit the right investment and applied good management. When Tata Motors took over JLR, Ratan Tata said, "Our philosophy for any companies we become involved with is that we grow with them, take them forward. Our interest in Jaguar and Land Rover is not based on outsourcing or taking their technology. Our challenge will be to nurture the brands and make them thrive." And thrive they certainly have. JLR even today accounts for 2/3 of Tata Motors' revenue. And with the inevitable rise in electrification, finally platform sharing between Tata Motors and JLR is going to happen. Tata Passenger Electric Mobility, they've licensed JLR's EMA electric modular architecture, and they're going to start manufacturing here in India for JLR for export as well as for Tata Motors for their new range of Avinya pure premium electric vehicles. Manufacturing is going to start at Sanand at the plant that Tata Motors recently acquired from Ford Motor Company. Agratas, Tata Sons' battery manufacturing company, they've committed to build a gigafactory in the UK with JLR as the anchor customer. Another 9,500 crores is going into a new manufacturing facility in Tamil Nadu. Details of it haven't been announced, but that is going to manufacture, not assemble, but manufacture JLRs in India for the global market. Towards the end of his tenure as chairman of Tata Motors, Ratan Tata was quoted as saying, "I have the credit and notoriety of getting us into this business. Automobiles are very emotive products and the technology is very engaging." Ratan Tata's vision created the Indica. His dream to go global created the follow-on to the Indica Vista. That X1 platform was engineered to meet the European crash safety norms, and that investment has paid over many times over because the X1 platform then underpinned the Nexon, and the Nexon then got electrified. The Nexon is now the best-selling electric vehicle in India. The Nexon single-handedly is leading India's charge towards electrification. Soon India will make electrified Jaguars and Land Rovers not just for India but for the global market. Ratan Tata's vision made India a global automotive powerhouse, and that is what you call legacy. A legacy that will stand the test of time. Answer this question correctly and win an Evo India hoodie. Which location was originally finalized to manufacture the Tata Nano? You want a hint? It is in chapter 6.